Really Happened radio show. Because World War III is a really bad idea. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And boy, that opening statement about World War III being a really bad idea, and yes, it has been a guiding philosophy of the website and the radio show, but boy, I get chills hearing that right now. We are so close to seeing this push for all these wars that the United States has started all over the globe to be just sort of melded together, and they say, yep, it's a world war. You must sacrifice for the good of the nation, blah, blah, blah. We have got a lot of stuff to talk about today, including the wars and assassinations and the rest of it. Phone lines are open, 800-313-9443, 800-313-9443. Manny's in our control room, twiddling the dials, keeping us out of trouble, ready to answer the phone when you call on in. As I said before, it's Thursday, April 4th. Sure happy it's Thursday, sure happy it's Thursday, sure happy it's Thursday. It is also the 45th anniversary of the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King. And like so many of those very tragic incidents from the 1960s, over the years, the official story has fallen apart into fragments. And we have a link there. One of the pieces of evidence that we found many years ago is a link to the front page of whatreallyhappened.com, and its headline is "The Fatal Shot Came from a Different Direction," meaning that not from this rooming house where James Earl Ray was supposed to be staying. The FBI was never able to match the rifle that supposedly belonged to James Earl Ray to the bullets recovered from Dr. King's body. They just stalled on tests and ballistic checks and everything until James Earl Ray died in prison. It's, again, in our enlightened age where we realize the government is lying to us about just about everything, it's not really a surprise that the official story of Martin Luther King's assassination was like that of the Kennedys and so many other people, and Vince Foster. It's just a complete fraud here. So that is something to certainly look into and look back on. Obviously, the top news right now is this incredible belligerence that we are seeing towards North Korea. And in order to recap, we need to go back. And so all of this began with the U.S. imposing sanctions on North Korea and making stink face because North Korea wants to be a nuclear power. Because the United States, so far, is only attacking nations that do not have nuclear weapons of mass destruction. The U.S. will say they do as an excuse, but it always turns out to be a complete fraud. It certainly was in Iraq. It's certainly turning out to be that way in Iran. And yes, North Korea does have nuclear weapons they're testing, but not able to deploy. Now, there's an interesting story that has come out. This is not being reported at all in any of the American media. It's coming out of the North Korean media from their online websites and their shortwave broadcasts. Apparently, 2 of their submarines have gone missing since setting out from this naval base, Hwanghae, I think it's pronounced. And they're very small submarines. They've just got a crew of 10. They're little mini submarines, short-range patrol submarines. 2 of them have disappeared. And 1 may be an accident. 2 at once disappearing. This starts to feel like a provocation. And this would be nothing new. Go in there, start sinking North Korean military ships. Don't tell anybody about it and wait for North Korea to retaliate or respond and then claim, oh, that was the unprovoked attack by those dastardly North Koreans, blah, 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 and the invasion is on. Now, we're coming up on a break here. We're going to break for some commercials. When we come back, I'm going to kind of go back over some history of how this kind of operation is used to start a war and blame the victim. That sort of feels like what's going on here. We're going to take a break for some commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And we are talking about this story. This is coming out of the North Korean media and is so far not been picked up by any of the American corporate media that I can detect. I could be wrong. But in the middle of all this runaway conditization about Jodi Arias and Michael Jackson lawsuit, and they're making a big deal about this sheriff who was shot dead in West Virginia. We're going to be talking about that a little bit later in the show. I'm not seeing any mention about this, but again, to recap, A couple of days ago, 2 of North Korea's short-range patrol submarines departed Hwanghae Naval Base and simply vanished. 1, maybe an accident. Submarines do get lost to accident. 2 at once, that looks to me like something happened. And the game here seems to be, we're going to do something to the other guy that makes them respond, and then we'll say that response was the initiating event. Hardly a new trick. We've seen it before. A good example would be Franklin Delano Roosevelt, when he was trying to basically get the United States into the war against Nazi Germany to help out his good buddy Stalin. Roosevelt had the U.S. Navy attack German shipping in the North Atlantic, even though there was no state of war between Germany and the United States. Adolf Hitler refused to respond to the provocation because he knew he did not want to go to war against the United States and its very powerful manufacturing resources. So that's when Roosevelt backed off and said, all right, let's get the back door to war with Germany by tricking Japan or goading Japan into attacking Pearl Harbor, act like that's the surprise attack, and we'll be off and running to big mistake number 2, to make the world safe for private central banking here. Now, I want to remind everybody of something that happened not too long ago involving a South Korean ship, the Cheonan, which during a South Korean naval exercise, the Cheonan was sunk by torpedo attack. And they made a big deal. It's North Korea. North Korea did it. It's a provocation. We've got to go to war. And they dredged up the remains of the actual torpedo, and it was shown all over the media saying, see, this is a North Korean torpedo. And what they were showing on TV didn't even match the blueprints. They were waving around saying, see, this is the blueprint of a North Korean torpedo, and they're exactly the same. It's a long tube, it's got a propeller, and it's got fins, and that's all you need to know. And, of course, careful examination showed key critical parts were very different between the torpedoes. And finally, weapons experts identified the remains of the torpedo as a German export design that North Korea does not use, but which is deployed on those Dolphin-class submarines that Germany has been forced to give to Israel. So that kind of fizzled out, and they backed off the whole Cheonan. But we need to remember, there's all kinds of deceptions used to start wars. Whether it's goading the Japanese into Pearl Harbor and acting like it's a surprise, claiming there were torpedoes in the Gulf of Tonkin, which weren't really there, the USS Maine in Havana Harbor, where even the ship's captain said, we caught on fire and the magazine blew up, and they said, no, it was a Spanish mine. We have to go to war against Spain. All wars begin with lies. Senator Hiram Johnson said, truth is the first casualty of war. In Sun Tzu, in Art of War, all war is based on deception. Anytime somebody wants a war, they have to lie their people into it. Adolf Hitler sending his people to attack the radio station at Gleiwitz, Germany, and frame Poland for it. 9/11 blamed the Arabs for it. And on and on and on. Now, the big news that they've been waving around yesterday and today is that North Korea supposedly has approved a nuclear strike on the United States. Now, this is entirely bogus for a couple of reasons. Can you see Kim Jong-un and his military high command in the war room saying, yes, we've decided we have to do a nuclear strike on the United States, and Kim says, wait a minute, hold off the launch for a few hours. I've got to get a press release out so the Americans know we are coming to annihilate them. That's just not going to happen. When somebody decides to turn the little keys, they do it without any warning. And again, North Korea's nuclear tests are underground. As of right now, they do not have a deliverable nuclear warhead, and they do not have a rocket that could deliver it to the United States, or here in Hawaii, or up in the main part of Alaska. They can reach Guam, but again, keep in mind, the last time North Korea tested the Taepodong-2, which is their longest-range rocket, it blew up in flight. This is not a credible threat. But the corporate media has been given the assignment to convince you North Korea is an imminent threat. We must invade. And there was an interesting story, and this was actually picked up by Investment Watch blog, and I'm kind of a little curious why they ran with it. Anyway, the headline is, concerned officials warn North Korea could explode a high-altitude nuclear device over the United States. And they're talking about EMP, and the power system would go down, and all the computers would fail in all the banks, so nobody knew who had the money and who was owed the money, and gee, isn't it a shame? We were just about to turn the U.S. economy around, and we were on the way up, and those dastardly North Koreans have destroyed the computers for all those Wall Street banks. Variation on the theme of the virtual 9/11 we were talking about a month ago. But again, North Korea does not have a deliverable nuclear weapon, and they certainly do not have a rocket that could carry a nuclear weapon from North Korea up over the mainland United States to an altitude of 300 to 400 miles, which would be required for an EMP explosion. So this is just more pro-war propaganda. They're trying to sell you this next war. The money junkies are desperate to escalate all these conflicts into a true world war where everybody around is going to say, oh yeah, it's a world war. We have to forget all about the private central banking Ponzi scheme. We got to forget all about the corruption in Washington, D.C. Now it's war. All sins by the government are forgiven. All poverty and homelessness and starvation will have to be tolerated because now it's a war and we must win. And by the way, we're going to lose this one. We don't have the 3 M's in the United States anymore. We don't have the manpower. We don't have the money, and we don't have the manufacturing. Pentagon's already announced that because they're unable to find companies within the United States to manufacture the high explosives used in munitions, they're starting to buy from foreign manufacturers. This government can't even make their own weapons anymore, and of course we know the weapons they are making in this country aren't doing very well. F-22 asphyxiating its pilots, F-35, even the Pentagon says, can't survive a dogfight against the latest generation Russian fighters. The littoral combat ships are underarmed and under-armored, probably will not survive their deployments, and it goes on and on and on. Now, because Guam is within the range of North Korea's Taepodong 2 rocket, the Pentagon has made a big deal of deploying what's called the THAAD, Ballistic Missile Defense System. The acronym stands for Theater High Altitude Aerial Defense. It's basically a larger version of Patriot, probably just as reliable as Patriot is, but they're deploying it over there in Guam over the Korea tensions. And I'm going to tell you right now, North Korea, for all the bluff and bluster that Kim Jong-un is doing to consolidate his power in his own country, because he's playing with his population what the U.S. government is playing with you. We're on the verge of a war. You have to forget about all the domestic problems and you've got to unite behind me. Wave the flag and so forth and so on. That's what he's doing. North Korea is not going to carry out any overt act because they know that is exactly what the United States wants. Will the U.S. or Israel carry out an act to be blamed on North Korea? Of course they will. It's what they've done before. Time and time again. So they have this THAAD over there at Guam, and they're just ramping up the rhetoric here. And again, just remember, the last time they were trying to get war going with North Korea involved that South Korean ship, the Cheonan. And they said, oh, North Korea torpedoed it for no reason at all. North Korea just sailed down into this South Korean naval exercise and sunk this ship without any reasonable cause, no provocation whatsoever, and then it turned out that North Korea could not have fired that torpedo. All wars are begun with lies and deception. I reprised a couple of my older articles at whatreallyhappened.com. Fake Terror, The Road to War and Dictatorship, which lays out in the historical context that a very common trick of every government is to create out of thin air the enemies you need. Emmanuel Goldstein, Al-Qaeda, Osama bin Laden. He was a CIA asset. And they said, boy, if we got a job for you, you're going to get promoted to the terror villain of the centuries. History shows we are lied and tricked into wars, and there is no reason not to presume the exact same thing is happening right now. We talked about Pearl Harbor was supposed to be this big surprise, and it wasn't. Roosevelt goaded the Japanese into the attack on Pearl Harbor following an 8-step plan by Office of Naval Intelligence Lieutenant Commander Arthur H. McCollum. and they knew the Japanese fleet was on the way. Contrary to the information you get from media and public schooling, the Japanese fleet was not maintaining radio silence because the larger ships with the big antennas were receiving information from Japan. They had to rebroadcast it to the rest of their ships. One of their fueling ships, racing to catch up with them, was sent their coordinates in the clear. They didn't even encode it. And their transmissions were so powerful, the radio man of the Matson steamship SS Lurline was picking it up as the Lurline was transiting from San Francisco to Honolulu. And he plotted exactly where in the Pacific the Japanese fleet was, and they arrived. Okay, got to take a break. I'll finish the story when we come back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And the corporate media is still going on about that coach who was fired at Rutgers because he was using profanity on the court when he was running his athletes, which that's what happened when I was in high school sports and college sports. We got profanity. It wasn't a big deal. We seem to be in this weird mindset that even as we shower white-hot flaming death onto innocent children all over the globe, we're not going to use bad words to prove that we are a just and moral people. Now, getting back to this situation about wars being started with lies and deception, we're talking about Pearl Harbor and how Roosevelt goaded the Japanese into this, following this 8-step plan from the Office of Naval Intelligence. And he was doing this because he'd already had U.S. naval ships attacking German shipping in the North Atlantic, and Hitler refused to respond. Wasn't going to fall for the bait. So the Japanese fleet that was sailing over to attack Japan, they were not maintaining radio silence. They were receiving broadcast messages from the Japanese High Command that were being intercepted right here on Oahu at a place called Station H, over on the windward side. And the remains of that shortwave listening station are still there to be seen to this very day. And the naval codes were all broken, and Roosevelt knew they were coming. And the Japanese fleet was broadcasting so much, the radio operator of the Matson steamship, the SS Lurline, was picking it up. And he plotted the exact location of the Japanese approaching fleet. And when the Lurline arrived in Honolulu Harbor on December 4th, just a few days before the attack, he gave his log and his plot map to the local Office of Naval Intelligence. And the U.S. Navy's library still has a card catalog entry for the logbook and map, but of course the logbook and map have long since disappeared. And so Pearl Harbor happened. Roosevelt knew they were coming, deliberately did not inform General Short and Admiral Kimmel, so they would take the fall for having suffered this disastrous defeat of this surprise attack. And by the way, if you go over to my article on Pearl Harbor, the mother of all conspiracy theories, it has a photo of the Honolulu Advertiser from December 1st, 1941, and it says right at the top, Japan is coming to attack us. So it wasn't a surprise attack. It was just presented as that by Roosevelt to the American people to get them all angry. We've got to go get those Japanese. And, of course, once the war was going, most of our military effort went into Europe, and it wasn't until Germany was destroyed that finally resources were sent back to the Pacific to clean up that mess, because Japan was never really the issue. It was always about Germany. And, of course, more recently we know about all the lies to get us into Iraq. They have weapons of mass destruction. They have nukes. They have germs. They have chemicals, all of which turned out to be completely fraudulent. And so when you hear all this rhetoric about North Korea is going to nuke us, and North Korea is going to do this, and North Korea is going to do that, it's just more of the same stuff. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, thrice, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 times, shame on me. We need to keep that in mind. All right, going to go to the phones. Ethan in New Mexico. Aloha, Ethan. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
I was thinking about this Korean thing, and I remembered a story. And I finally found it and put it up. Sherry Questioning All found the story, but evidently we've been flying people and equipment in North Korea secretly, and the Japanese complained about it last month.
That's right. I remember reading about that.
And I'm just, we know they set these wars up. We know these things they're just phony. They're like a basketball game with contrived situation. And I've been trying for 2 days to find the story, and I finally did.
Okay, can you resend that in to me, and I'll post it up to the top of whatreallyhappened.com, because it's timely that you found that, because a lot of people are starting to scratch their heads. North Korea is talking about restarting their nuclear power station, which would allow them to make weapons-grade plutonium, and everybody's saying, well, if that reactor has been shut down all these years, just where is North Korea getting these nuclear bombs they're testing? And there are two explanations. One is that somebody in the U.S. gave them one and said, here, play with this, have fun. Nothing will happen. Remember when April Glaspie told Saddam Hussein, you can go into Kuwait and the United States will do nothing about it? And he walked right into a big old bear trap that led to Desert Storm. Now, we know that following North Korea's first underground test of a nuclear bomb, surveillance overflights of North Korea picked up samples of the fallout, of the leakage from this test, and the radioisotopic signature from that fallout matched that from a joint Israel-South African nuclear test back in 1979, which triggered what was the so-called Vela incident. And so, given that documents from South Africa prove Israel has been trying to sell clandestine nuclear weapons around the world, it is not beyond the realm of possibility that Israel sold one to North Korea, or 2 or 3 or 4. So that's another possible source for these nuclear weapons.
Yeah, we're missing a bomb, aren't we? Remember the B-52 was going to Barksdale? They were missing a cruise missile?
Yeah, absolutely. That was a very strange situation where they loaded the weapons on the wing pylons. You don't transport nuclear weapons on the wing pylons, because wing pylons do have a habit of falling off. And yeah, it left with, I think, 6 and showed up with 5, and then the flight crew all mysteriously died in the subsequent months here. So there's an unaccounted for nuclear bomb somewhere in the United States right now. Got to take a break for commercials. We will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And one of our listeners has already put up as a member story the item that the last caller was referring to, that apparently during 2011 and 2012, the senior U.S. administration officials held secret talks in North Korea and were flying in some kind of unknown equipment. Japan kicked up a fuss, and the U.S. State Department actually warned Japan not to make further inquiries, saying it would harm bilateral relations. U.S. military planes flew from an airbase in Guam to Pyongyang and back on April 7th, 2012, and again on a much longer visit lasting from August 18th through 20th in 2012. So something was going on that you're not supposed to know about. They needed to turn North Korea into a credible threat. They've got nukes, so forth and so on. Now, moving right along here. Over in Iran, they have gone public saying that the IAEA's policy of trying to put pressure on Iran for its non-existent nuclear weapons program is being directed by the United States. I know, not really a big shock and surprise. But they're basically coming out and saying this is all being driven by the United States. We're hearing similar statements from North Korea, that it's the United States that's desperate for this war. And they're absolutely correct. This is all driven by the money. This whole interlocked global Western Ponzi scheme banking system is on the verge of coming down all together at the same time. And when it happens, if they don't have a world war to blame it on, then the finger of blame is going to be pointed at the real culprits. The money junkie bankers and their Ponzi scheme private central banks and their parasitic sycophant politicians that they bought and paid for to set up this little scam. And that's why they're desperate to get a war as a distraction, so everybody will accept lower standards of living to pay for it all, and endless taxation to pay for it all. And it's all the fault of Germany and North Korea and Iran, because they've done it before. And it worked the last 2 times in big mistake number 1 and big mistake number 2. And that's why they're trying to play the same scam all over again. Crash of 1907, solved the problem with World War I. Crash of 1929, solved the problem with World War II. Crash of 2008, solved the problem with World War III. And they think you're all dumb enough to fall for it 3 times in a row. And it's all about propping up the fiat paper currencies from these private central banks. All wars are bankers' wars. They don't want to accept responsibility for the fraud and corruption. They're not man enough to stand up and say, yes, you caught me. It was a banking system designed to enslave with debt. You caught us on that one. We're sorry. You're not going to see Congress stand up and say, yeah, we sold you into the slavery of the bankers back in 1913, and everything we've done since then has been to please the bankers and not you. They're not man enough to do that. They're looking for somebody to blame it on. It's the imaginary playmate in the sky's will, or it's somebody else's fault. That's what politics is. Take credit for the good things, even if you had nothing to do with it, and dump the blame for the bad stuff you do on somebody else. Those dastardly North Koreans, those Germans, those Russians, whatever. And they've played this trick on us twice. They're trying to play it a third time. And you need to remember, before the creation of the Federal Reserve, there was no such thing as a world war. And now we're heading into big mistake number 3. And it's ramping up it's ramping up the whole, all over the place here. Belarus is now rehearsing a nuclear attack on Warsaw in their latest war games. Everybody knows what's coming. The fact that you, the people of planet Earth, want to have nothing to do with this is irrelevant. It's the economy that is driving all of this Western-style system of banking against the rest of the world. That's what they mean when they say clash of civilizations. It's a war between banking systems, between those nations enslaved to private central banks issuing the public currency as a loan at interest against every other nation that doesn't want to play by that game. That was the motivation for the invasion of Libya. It's the reason why all of a sudden, ever since Russia took control of their central bank, oh, the Russians are the bad guys again. Trying to drag the world back to the 1950s and 1960s and the Cold War, when all the government and the media had to do was wave Russians at you and you would just wet yourself out of fear. They're trying to get back there. Now, Russia is conducting war games to project power out of the Black Sea into the through the Bosphorus into the Mediterranean. And apparently now the United States, Britain, and Canada are getting ready to run a large naval war game in the North Atlantic in order to prevent Russia from their northern fleet from projecting power into the North Atlantic and interrupting the sea lanes of communication. That's what's going on here. Everybody knows what's coming. The United States needs to start a new world war to try and save the Ponzi scheme banking system, to try and drive the world back into Bretton Woods, where everybody in the world does business in U.S. dollars. That's what your children are being asked to risk life and limb for, to prop up the U.S. paper dollar. That's it. That's the real agenda, the real motive. They want to take the world back to Bretton Woods, where the dollar reigns supreme over planet Earth. And while it was backed by gold, everybody was happy with that. But it's not backed by anything anymore except your slave labor. And there aren't enough living Americans to ever make good on all those treasury bonds. 10 of the top 20 world economies have already abandoned using the dollar as an intermediate currency. Australia and China are getting ready to drop the dollar as an intermediate currency. Nations are fleeing the dollar faster than the U.S. can conquer them and force them back on. It's already a losing proposition. We're going to grab a phone call here. Michael in Missouri. Aloha, Michael. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, this is Robert from Missouri.
Robert from Missouri. My mistake, or somebody's mistake. I deny all responsibility. It was the fault of those evil North Koreans.
Yeah, I hear you. I'm a first-time caller about it. Listened to you for a while. And I just happened to be listening to Mr. Jones over there at INFOWARS, and he is talking about we need to immediately go decapitate the regime in North Korea. Him and his buddy Mike Adams, the health ranger, they're on the air today, and I heard it myself, no lie. They both want to attack North Korea because of their rhetoric, because they're threatening to attack us. And they're using Fox News and the rest of the compromised media as their, as the catalyst to do this. So yeah, and you think Alex Jones is some kind of guy that is, looking to do the right thing. He's over there talking today. We need to decapitate Kim Jong-un and his regime.
Oh, Alex here. Somebody else sent me another article. Apparently Alex is out there saying that China is really covertly controlling America's corporate media, which makes no sense at all, given that China certainly does not want the United States to be going into North Korea because of the potential escalation. But this is just what he's out there saying, and, how far the once mighty have fallen is all I can say to that. I just have to shake my head at this stuff.
Well, I mean, it's entertainment, but gosh, I mean, when you go off into tangents like this, talking about how after all the warfare that we've inflicted on the world, and now we need to go do more, and then somehow that this is a legitimate piece of warfare after decapitating Gaddafi, we're trying to do this to Assad, Hussein, and for me to hear these guys say that after all this time, it just, these guys are somehow operatives of some sort of the Israelis, and that's all I can say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's. I think this is going to be a really good litmus test for who is genuinely out there trying to get the information out there, and who has been in some way either bought or compromised, because there is no justification for going into North Korea. They're not a threat to the United States of America. Yes, Kim Jong-un is a bit of a blowhard, but then so is Alex Jones, and I don't think anybody's suggesting a decapitation strike onto Alex Jones' studio. I think we're seeing an almost polarization in the media, not just the corporate media, but even in the independent media, where it's just drawing apart between the ones saying, yes, war is great, war is fun, war will make us have shinier teeth, or whatever it is they're going to say, and those of us who are pointing out, we have already invaded all these countries around the world. It is not doing the United States and its people any tangible benefit. It's all being driven by the money junkies. And that's really...
Check this out. He wants to talk about China controlling Hollywood and making them edit their movies. But who's the controllers of China? It's the usual suspects that are controlling everybody else. And so he never wants to get to that next level and say, okay, who are China's builders and controllers? It was our friends from the City of London and Wall Street and the rest of them.
Yeah, this idea that China is in control of Hollywood. I mean, I spent a lot of years of my life in Hollywood, and up until in fact before the time of Bruce Lee, Chinese were very much discriminated against. If you go back and you look at older movies, they'd have white people in makeup playing the Chinese roles, just like even earlier when they'd have white people in blackface playing the black roles. And Bruce Lee was the person who made real Chinese, doing real Chinese shows, acceptable. Of course, when they did, when Warner Brothers did Kung Fu, they had David Carradine playing the lead role, even though that was supposed to be half Chinese. I can tell you right now from personal experience, the Chinese influence in Hollywood is virtually nil, compared to certain other influences. For a while, Japan had come in, following the devaluation of the dollar in the 90s. They came in and they were buying up all the studios, but when they found out they couldn't get the finances under control because of all the corruption and fraud going on, they quickly sold out and went back to Japan. But as far as China being in control of Hollywood and the corporate media, that's one of the most absurd things I've ever heard.
Well, it's the same tribe controls Hollywood that controls China, and that's the joke on everybody. You know what I'm saying?
Well, I think perhaps less so in China than here in the United States of America, but the idea of saying that China is a danger because they're controlling the media, I think the only time I ever heard anything more absurd was back in the movie Network, which was a brilliant movie. I think was one of Paddy Chayefsky's finest screenplays, but they made a point of trying to say it was Arabs were in control of the media. And again, sorry?
He throws that one out there too. That the Saudis somehow got control of Hollywood and American media.
Yeah.
When you look at who owns it all, I don't see any Al Hussein's names behind it.
No, I didn't either. Again, I didn't see that in Hollywood either, and I was there for Let's see. I started. When did I start? Well, let's say 1979, which is when I went to work on Star Trek: The Motion Picture, and I left the film industry basically about a year ago when I got about halfway through off the map, and I just realized I didn't have the energy to keep that career going and do justice to the website and the radio show. And no, I didn't see Chinese significantly influencing the American corporate media. I didn't see Arabs significantly influencing the media. Quite the contrary. I know there was some Arab productions that came in, Mohammed, Messenger of God, and to try and give the other side of the argument, and it just ran into all kinds of interference, and they couldn't get distribution contracts, and it came and went in the blink of an eye. And so the iron fist of control in Hollywood, I can tell you right now from personal experience, because I was there, it isn't China, and it isn't the Arabs.
All right. Well, thanks, Mike.
All right. Let's see. Moving right along here, we have, let's see, over in Libya, apparently gunmen have attacked the police station in Tripoli. This is not the first time. And masked gunmen attacked a police station in the Libyan capital. They took 4 officers prisoner and released 3 detainees. It looks to me like Libya is not at all happy with their brand new U.S.-approved puppet regime and their brand new money junkie-approved private central bank issuing the public currency as a loan at interest. The people of Libya understand what this invasion of their country was all about. It was all tied in with Gaddafi establishing a state bank so that money would be a public utility for the people. And it was all about that gold dinar, that value-based currency. And Gaddafi's declaration that if you wanted to buy Libya's oil, you would pay for it in gold dinars. Next thing you know, invasion, murder him, get rid of him. Same thing in Iraq. Iraq got permission from the United Nations to sell their oil for euros. The U.S. invades, lynches Hussein. Iraq's oil is back on the market only for dollars. It's all about Bretton Woods. It's all about the dollarification of the world's resource-rich areas. That's the reason for this war. We're not bringing these people democracy. We're not involved in any kind of humanitarian help. We're not making their life better. They are not a threat to us. It is simply conquest for profit. The ugliest, most sinful, most evil form of warfare. War for profit. And your children in uniform are going to pay the price for that. Over in Israel, there's been a bit of a kerfuffle. Apparently, Israeli soldiers killed 2 Palestinian teenagers. Again, the teenagers weren't doing anything. They were just walking along, and the soldiers just hauled off and popped them. It's just escalating out of control over there. Meanwhile, there's an interesting story over at Ex Republic TV, and I guess this comes under the category of studies and foregone conclusions, where they're reporting on drones are basically the main reason for the rise in global anti-U.S. sentiment. Gee, you think? Sending in these robot killers into other people's countries, and you blow up somebody you claim is a terror suspect, but don't prove, and you take out 20, 30, 40 innocent people around them, yeah, people are not going to maintain an entirely cheerful disposition, and they're not going to want to salute that American flag on the side of that drone. And, of course, the official U.S. government policy is they have no bad feelings about the drones. They hate us for our freedoms. They hate us because we have Disneyland, and they do not. They hate us because we have Coca-Cola machines, and they do not. They hate us because they dress funny, and they worship a different religion. All the usual stuff. They can't even come up with a new excuse. It's just a rehash of the same tired war propaganda we have been subjected to for the last century. We're going to take a break for commercials. We will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to grab a couple of phone calls here. Dan in Oregon. Aloha, Dan. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind today?
Well, first of all, Mike, thank you for accepting the call. I really only have one question. And the main media, well, a lot of the media, doesn't deal with any internal buildup in North Korea as far as their arms or military. But the question is I'm asking is this: the buildup of the Chinese forces on the Korean side, that's not, my opinion, it's not really for military intervention, but as to prevent North Koreans from running to Korea. They don't have the setup of millions.
To running to China. You may very well be right. I mean, North Korea's been dealing with issues of famine and economic hardship for quite some time. And if the U.S. is viewing North Korea as a stepping stone to get into a conflict with China, again, to prevent the gold-backed yuan from challenging the dollar as an international currency, they may be in for a surprise, because even though China overtly supports North Korea, if you look very carefully over at the United Nations, China has actually been siding with the U.S. in terms of sanctions to tone down North Korea's rhetoric. China basically, I think it was just yesterday, called in the diplomats for North and South Korea and the U.S. and was out there saying, we got to cool this whole thing. So it may very well be that when the United States invades North Korea, China may simply say, well, this really isn't our fight. And they will garrison their border, as you say, to prevent things from spilling over into China, and the United States will have invaded North Korea and reignited the Korean War without gaining their ultimate objective, which is conflict with China.
Okay, Mike, thank you. Have a nice day and doing a good job.
Thank you very much. Here, we're going to switch over to a heckler in Colorado. Aloha, heckler. Please heckle.
How you doing, Mike?
Doing great.
Just to play devil's advocate, I'm not sure the extent about what Mr. Jones' point was, but specifically, there was a remake of the movie, and I have not seen it, but it was called Red Dawn remake.
Yeah.
And I guess the original script called for Chinese to be jumping, parachuting down onto the West Coast and invading America, and somehow the script was changed to force it to be North Koreans. And I think the North Koreans were also the bad guys in one of those James Bond movies about 10 years ago, too.
Yeah, they were. Basically, Hollywood is going to make movies that demonize whoever the next target's going to be. And so I think that was the reason why it went from being Chinese to North Korean, even though either one is extremely unlikely. Neither China nor North Korea have the military infrastructure to bring large numbers of troops to the North American continent. We had the same exact situation in World War II, where everybody was being warned that the Japanese were going to be swarming ashore in Malibu and Santa Barbara and causing all kinds of damage, and the reality was that Japan had no intention of going any further east than Pearl Harbor, and they only attacked Pearl Harbor to destroy the American fleet that Roosevelt had moved there from San Diego as bait. Got to take a break for station identification. We'll be right back.
Than ever, killing many viruses and bacteria in our homes and at work is important. With the flu epidemic running rampant, you need to protect yourself and your family the best you can with purified air. Our air purifiers not only kill many viruses and bacteria in the air, but on surfaces too. Our air purifiers will also kill molds, fungi, mildew, oxidizes chemical fumes and toxic gases, removes dust, pollen, pet odors, and smoke. We have portable units, HVAC and industrial size units. In our homes today, protect your family the best you can by calling 1-877-605-9200 or go to our online.
And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show, and I want to talk a little bit about the economy because, again, this is what is driving all of this. This Ponzi scheme system of banking has to crash. And every time it gets close to crashing, in order to have somebody else to blame it all on, all the hardship, all the hunger, all the joblessness and starvation, they start a world war. So Wall Street and Washington, D.C. can say, it's not our fault. The system works. It's those dastardly insert name of convenient enemy here. But apparently around the world, we're starting to see more and more fractures showing up in this global banking cartel, this global Ponzi scheme. Major hits in the stocks. Australia, Japan. Japan started really low. At the last second, there was a huge surge that got them way back up. But the European and U.S. stock markets are starting to reverse their gains they were getting earlier in the year. The euro continues to drop in value against other currencies. We're hearing over from FARS News, Germany's economic output is near stagnation because so much wealth has been looted from ordinary people. Nobody has anything left to go to the stores and buy all these products. And again, it points out this fallacy that a healthy economy has all the wealth concentrated at the very, very top, in the 1%. And that's simply not so. A healthy economy has adequate money and wealth flowing to all levels of society and into all necessary segments of investment. And that's basically what government was supposed to be doing to keep the economy healthy. But our politicians, the finest politicians money can buy, have adopted the mindset of the Wall Street money junkies that a healthy economy means they're rich and everybody else is poor. And I think one of the most evil, debased, debauched form of human are those who cannot feel they are rich unless they see everybody else around them poor. I think for most of us non-sociopathic, non-psychotic, non-addicted people, we would be happy with a reasonable home, reasonable security, small amount of toys that we can play with, and a happy life with our family. And all that we're dealing with right now comes from people who can't feel that they're rich and successful unless they have it all and everybody else has none. It's that old Attila the Hun mentality. It's not enough for me to succeed, everybody else must fail. And that is destructive of society. We're seeing that all around us. Look around at the United States of America. Adam Smith was wrong. Individuals pursuing their own greed do not move society forward. In fact, our society is moving backward. Between the fallout from planned obsolescence and the desire to keep us working as hard as we can just to stay where we are, progress has been completely abandoned other than in political speeches. The euro is continuing to tumble as the reserve currency. We're getting this out of the Daily Bell. I'm sure from the point of view of the United States, that's great. If the euro is losing trust as a reserve currency, people will flock back to the dollar. But they're not doing that. They're looking for an alternative outside the box, outside the euro, outside the dollar. They're moving away from it, and they're doing it faster than the U.S. can conquer them. As we mentioned earlier in the week, BRICS is dumping the euro as fast as they can. A year ago, they announced they were going to start dumping the dollar. The trend is obvious. The trend is my friend. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Now, earlier, we were hearing the BRICS and their summit. Now, BRICS is an acronym for Brazil, Russia, and a bunch of other countries who are outside the sphere of influence of the United States. And up until now, they've been sort of a mutual commerce enabling organization. But we saw Russia basically take the lead in saying that it's time for BRICS to expand its scope to get into world politics, and we have since found they're proposing their own global bank. And now we're seeing this story coming out of Veterans News Now, how the BRICS summit has basically declared red lines on Syria and Iran. They're coming out in public saying we will oppose or we reject the idea of any further U.S. invasions into Syria and Iran. Now, this is already backing up a policy Russia has been expressing all along. Russia has sent a clear, unequivocal message to the United States of America that they will turn either Syria or Iran or both into a new Vietnam and simply wear the United States down in a war of attrition. They can do it. They've got the 3 M's. They've got men, money, and manufacturing, and the United States does not. So this is another message coming over from the rest of the world that enough is enough is enough. They see the United States and Israel as the new axis of evil, just invading countries for the heck of it. And they're trying to send a message saying it must stop. Now, I have often referred to the Enron scandal in reference to the global warming hoax. And a reminder that Al Gore, when he was setting up his carbon trading scheme, had assistance from Ken Lay. And the goal there was to loot planet Earth with carbon dioxide, the same way that Enron had looted California with electricity. Now, Ken Lay, we were told, passed away rather suddenly and surprisingly. And his cohort, Jeffrey Skilling, was sent to prison for 24 years for fraud, insider trading, conspiracy, and he was thrown in prison back in 2006 for 24 years. Now we're getting word that there is a deal in the works where he will be allowed to leave prison early because he has suffered so much. Blah, 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 blah. So if you're above a certain level of income in this country, you don't have to pay the price for the crimes that you commit. You really don't. Now, I want to talk about this tax loophole. This came out of a video, well, not videos to view. They're basically just forwarding a video from an independent news station in the United States. And we're beginning to see this as a trend. When you have a network affiliate, but you're privately owned, you're a little bit freer of the leash that the wholly owned network affiliates have to abide by. And we're seeing this with a lot of these independent stations. And, of course, when they start coming out with these reports, they're picked up and they go viral on the alternative media. And they're actually getting a larger audience for these reports than the wholly owned corporate-controlled media is doing. So, anyway, this story, and the headline, if you want to see the video, go to whatreallyhappened.com and look for the headline, Another Massive Tax Loophole. And this is a story about how the Internal Revenue Service, in order to be able to collect taxes from illegal aliens, came up with something called ITIN, the Individual Taxpayer Identification Number, because illegal aliens can't get a Social Security card. But the IRS wants money, so they said you will get an ITIN number and you'll be required to file an income tax return. And it is blown up in their face big time. Because what this TV report has uncovered is that all of these illegal aliens, they will fake, minimal earnings. I'm only making so much money, and then they'll file for something called the Additional Child Tax Credit. Often for children that are still living down in Mexico. Often for children who do not exist and do not live with them. It is a massive fraud, and these illegals are getting these huge tax refunds from the IRS for thousands of dollars. One of the ones they showed on the air was something like a $14,000 refund sent to the illegal alien. And apparently the IRS is not doing anything at all about this. Apparently there was a whistleblower who was reporting all of these 100% fraudulent income tax returns to the IRS, and the IRS is not doing anything about it, wouldn't be interviewed, didn't want to do anything about it, saying, oh, Congress has to deal with this, just passing the buck. So the short version of this is, the illegal aliens who are in this country illegally, they are by default criminals, are getting thousands and thousands of dollars from the IRS, while you, the legal citizens of the United States of America, continue to pour your money in. And apparently the IRS doesn't see a problem with this. So the headline is Another Massive Tax Loophole. You've got to look at that. And it's just another reminder that for some strange reason, people who have come into this country illegally are getting a really sweet deal at your expense. And I know I'm going to get emails and phone calls saying, you're being racist, you know, how could you resent Mexicans coming to this country, you have a Mexican name, blah, 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 blah. Well, first of all, my name is not Mexican, it's actually Sephardic. And yes, my father did come in from outside this country, but he did it legally. He went through the approved legal mechanism. And anybody who wants to come into this country who does so legally, welcome. Have fun. Join our society. Be a productive member. We're not talking about issues of racism here. We're talking about legality. We've got this wide open southern border. You ever stop to think, for all this groping and fondling you're having to go through at the airport, that if there were a real terrorist out there, as opposed to all these phonies running around with towels they steal from Holiday Inn saying, I'm Al-Qaeda, be afraid of me. If there was a real terrorist and they had a real nuclear bomb, they can get into this country, just walk across that border from Mexico, nobody will stop them. And so these people are coming up here and they're just looting the system. And even when they're caught, nothing is being done. It is a national scandal. I guess it's presumed they will always vote for the incumbent party. I'm not exactly sure what's going on. Now, over at Blacklisted News, they're still talking about the very real possibility that in the event of a financial crisis, that the United States government will in fact do to you, the American people, what the bankers of Europe just did to the people of Cyprus. Just shave it all off and grab it. By the way, somebody had an interesting comment the other day when you're talking about this 80% confiscation of savings accounts in Cyprus. That's not a haircut. That's a castration. And they're absolutely right. You really should get your money out of the bank while you still can. Over at From the Trenches World Report, interesting article, nearly 50 million Americans are living in poverty in this country. That's the worst since the Johnson administration. And I got an email from somebody, we were talking about how, again, coincidental number, 50 million Americans are on food stamps, and they wrote in to remind me that food stamps are issued on a household basis. So when they say 50 million Americans are on food stamps, what they mean is 50 million households. So the actual number of Americans trying to live on food stamps is much, much greater. If your household has a husband, a wife, and one kid, you're talking 150 million Americans on food stamps. And the bankers and the federal government and the corporate media want to tell you the economy is great, it's recovering, look at the Dow. I don't think so. Now, one of the big stories that we did see on the corporate media today, they're going on about it, how cancer clinics across the country, and remember, these are for-profit operations. They're there to make money. There was a big scandal a while back where it turned out that Cancer Treatment Centers was artificially inflating its survival and cure rate on their advertising. And they've been called on that one. But the cancer clinics across America are now starting to turn away Medicare patients because they're not sure they'll be reimbursed for the chemotherapy. And they're blaming the sequestration. And I want to make a point here. You, the American people, pay taxes to take care of this nation, the United States of America, and its legal citizens. But the federal government is taking your money. They're giving it to Wall Street. They're giving it to Israel. They're spending it on these wars of conquest, which are leading us into disaster. And where are the budget cuts falling? On the things that you wanted to pay taxes for. The roads, the schools, medical care. Sounds to me like we're back in a situation of taxation without representation, where you're taxed and you have nothing to say about where that money goes at all. And in that little school in New Hampshire that I grew up in, I was taught that taxation without representation was a legitimate reason to fire the government. Just something for you to think about. We're going to take another break for commercials. We will be back after these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're going to go to the phones. Nick in Japan. Aloha, Nick. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha. Really quick question for you. Got a statement. George Carlin had this perfect metaphor. I think it was in Complaints and Grievances, where he said that everybody blames the politician, everybody blames the bankers. He says, I don't usually blame the politicians and bankers. He says, they come from the same institutions of America, churches, schools, etc. He says, I don't blame them because if they were really, if it was really just their fault, where are the upstanding, benevolent Americans? Where are they? He says, we don't have them. They're down at the mall, buying shoes with lights in them and that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. And so I think with this, he sort of laid the blame with the American consumer and not so much the politician. But my question really is this, because, the usual myth of people that normally call into the show, like myself, I guess, but and people that listen to talk show radio, is the illusion or the myth that there is a victimhood or problem with authority, victimhood complex, or that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. And so it sort of ties into this idea that because we've been playing the same routine over and over, history is replete with this situation where there's the predator and there's the sheeple, the victimhood complex, the sheep. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so I'm just wondering if it sort of ties into that whole Aristotle concept, which is there are natural-born slaves and natural-born administrators, or carefully rewritten natural-born sheeple and natural-born predators. So I'm just wondering, because it seems like history is replete. We just keep on playing the same game over and over again. You look at Americans today, we've got our money in the banks, we've got our money, we're participating in the system, and people are just not angry enough. They're not angry here in Japan. Mm-hmm. They're not angry. I think Japan we just recently got this $1.2 trillion stimulus package, and the people are just walking around like nothing's wrong. It's just the same old thing, nothing to be concerned about. The United States, same situation. It seems like I talk to my family.
Can I respond to that, because we're almost out of time on this segment here anyway. I'm a great admirer of George Carlin, but I think he missed what's really going on. Obviously, we all are at least taught to respect Aristotle, but on the other hand, he was the guy who came up with the idea that the Earth was the unmoving center of the universe, and he definitely blew the call on that one. What is going on here is that the vast majority of the population are enslaved by their beliefs. We are all raised to believe in certain things. Thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not bear false witness. Our so-called leaders are the ones who don't follow those rules. They'll pretend to in public. I am an honorable man. I am running for political office. But we are finding out time and time again that the people who are rising to these positions of leadership are able to do so because they are not fettered by these beliefs in honesty, fairness, morality. And that is really the reason. The people that you are calling sheeple are the ones who are still having a worldview where everybody is honest for the most part. Everybody is, mostly telling the truth. Everybody's mostly being fair. And that is simply not the reality when you get higher and higher in our social order. The higher it goes, the crookeder it gets. And that is the reality. And I'm not saying that everybody in the country ought to start lying and cheating and stealing, but what we need to do is recognize those people who are appointing themselves leaders over us don't deserve those positions because they are not conforming with the laws and morality of the land. When the United States was founded, the founding fathers tried to craft a set of laws and protections because they understood that politics will attract the very sort of people who should not be allowed in politics. And if there is a failure, it is because we, the American people, lured away by advertising or entrapped and enslaved by our own beliefs to render unto Caesar, refused to stand up when our politicians and our leaders started acting illegally and immorally and hold them to account. But I don't think people are completely uninvolved, and I'm seeing a lot of anger building around the world. I know in Japan, because of the culture, they prefer not to show their anger and upset, but that doesn't mean it's not in there percolating. Okay?
Yeah, that's a good point. Well, I'm just wondering if we even have the capacity to really get angry, because there's no perfect society. It seems like history, you just look throughout history.
Well, let me respond to that because we're coming to the end of this segment here. I think we have the capacity to get angry. I'm surprised Americans have not become more angry than they are. But again, we're now finding out that fluoride in the drinking water is in fact a tranquilizer. In fact, fluoride is the key ingredient of Prozac. And that may be the reason we're unable to feel anger, is our governments are drugging us. We'll be right back after these commercials. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. The corporate media is going on and on about dark matter in the universe, and can we find it and prove that the Big Bang math all works out. Meanwhile, we are hearing from the North Korean media. They have announced they have information that the United States is preparing to send an air combat group, meaning a carrier and its support vehicles, to the Korean peninsula. So they're definitely ramping up. They need a war. They don't even care who it's with or how many of your children will have to die in it. Still seeing the repercussions from one of the largest Dutch gold banks defaulting on physical gold delivery. And that's what it is. It's a default. And they're going out and saying, no, we'll just give you a pile of this paper money that's the equivalent value, and you shouldn't complain about that. Well, they're just printing that stuff up out of thin air. Now, over in New York, this is kind of an interesting story. We're getting this, in fact, this was actually reported on CNN's website. The fast food workers in New York, McDonald's, Wendy's, Domino Pizza, they've all gone on strike. They just walked off the job over the poor pay and poor conditions. And I'll bet you right now, McDonald's is wishing they hadn't been demanding college degrees for their burger-flipping jobs right about now. Because those college people, they've got dangerous ideas. They won't do what you tell them, like those high school dropouts will. Now, an interesting story, and this is over on Washington's blog. There's been a survey regarding Americans' attitude toward the big banks, the too big to fail, too big to jail banks. And they found out that half of the respondents are in favor of directly breaking them up. And most of the rest were simply in favor of stopping the artificial support and letting them fail on their own or shrink on their own. And only a tiny, tiny fraction of respondents were opposed to anything that would impact the big banks, and I presume that tiny fraction of respondents are probably employees or stockholders in those large banks. But the public mood has definitely shifted. They understand these big banks are the problem. Meanwhile, showing the continuing revolving door between Wall Street and Washington, D.C., Bruce Heyman, a former Goldman Sachs executive and one of Obama's top fundraisers, is next in line to be the U.S. ambassador to Canada. And we may presume, should he get that position when he's up in Canada, he will be there representing not necessarily the United States government, but Goldman Sachs. And after the wonderful job Goldman Sachs did in Greece, you Canadian listeners have my deepest, deepest sympathies. Now, apparently, a little over a year ago, and we need to pay attention to this now because of the extreme fragility of the economy and the rush to get a whole new world war going. But a little over a year ago, Obama signed Executive Order 13603. It was called National Defense Resources Preparedness. And this is an executive order that basically arrogates to the administration the authority to commandeer and take control of all water supplies, all human and animal food supplies, all transportation, all energy supplies, all construction materials, all health resources, all farm equipment, all fertilizers, all fuels, on and on and on and on and on. In other words, all Obama has to do is gin up some kind of a national emergency, and the United States will transition into a state where there is no more personal property. Everything you have is the property of the government, and they will decide where and when and whether you can use it or not. And again, this is an illegal application of the executive order. The executive order's function was for the president to execute the will of the Congress, not simply create laws out of thin air with the stroke of a pen. And Congress should have reined in this use of the executive order a long time ago. Of course, we understand why Congress won't do that, because those people in Congress are all lusting for that Oval Office, and they dream of the day they're going to get it. And when they get it, they want it to have all the extraordinary authority and power that the current president has. Nobody wants to become president and have to actually abide by that Constitution any longer. Where's the fun in that? Now, another piece of information we need to be keeping in mind is back in January of 2012, the United States and Canada signed what was called the U.S.-Canada Civil Assistance Plan. Now, this is an updated version that updated the one originally signed in 2008. And basically what this plan says is that the United States or Canada's government can deploy their own domestic military into the other country to provide military support of civil authorities. Now, the reason for this is, going all the way back to the Combat Arms Survey, the U.S. government is realizing they're going to have a very difficult time getting American military to fire on American citizens during gun confiscation or fuel confiscation or food confiscation or gold confiscation or any of that stuff. So the whole purpose of this agreement is, when Obama declares his national emergency and invokes these executive orders powers, you're going to have a bunch of Canadian soldiers down here patrolling the streets of the United States of America to shoot the American people. And by the way, this is exactly the arrangement that cost Charles I his head. So they're making all these plans. Washington, D.C. is making plans to declare war on the 50 states. And I hope the 50 states are getting ready to deal with that. Sadly, most state governors are dreaming of their trips to Washington, D.C. and potential run for the White House. So they're already compromised by their own political ambitions. Over at antiwar.com, a troubling but not surprising article, basically that the government is spying on peaceful political dissidents and considers them all potential terrorists. They're getting into a real bunker mentality over there at 1600 Pennsylvania. And apparently part of the President's daily intelligence briefing includes a report on peaceful demonstrations. It's now considered enemies of the warfare state. Now, over in France, we're all hearing about the problems with former President Sarkozy and his scandals. But apparently his successor, Hollande, is not doing very well either. He has not kept the promises for change that he made coming into office, just like Barack Obama. And apparently in the wake of the Cahuzac scandal, French approval of his presidency is dwindling rapidly, and the French people are very angry over France's intervention in Mali, because that was only going to be a couple of weeks. Now it looks to be pretty much open-ended, and we know why. France's war in Mali, which is Africa's third largest gold producer, was started just 1 week after Germany requested the return of all Germany's gold bullion, supposedly in the vaults of the Bank of France. See that little kind of a connection going there. Back to the phones. Peter in Los Angeles. Aloha, Peter. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Michael. I'm calling about the National Defense Resources Preparedness Executive Order.
Yes.
Which I don't know. I think I may have sent that to you. I know you know about it, but I may have sent it to you just 3 days ago.
Yes.
But the one of the things that it doesn't do, Michael, it completely excludes Congress. Congress has no. It's completely up to the president to declare the emergency, which is not defined what an emergency is. Obama's dog puke, whatever, you know.
I don't think anybody will buy that one, but obviously a run on the banks or people getting very unhappy with Wall Street. We know in earlier versions of these executive orders, a financial calamity is listed among the reasons for the president to declare a national emergency.
Well, there's the criteria, if you read the thing, is completely up to the president. There is no definition whatsoever, and literally it could be he just has a bad day and he wants, and there's no review on this by the Congress for 1 year. There's 1 year. Now, if Congress could, if they're in session, which I doubt that he would do it if they were in session, but say they're not in session. If they are in session, they could pitch a complaint and maybe make some trouble. But the smarter thing for Obama to do would be to do this when they're not in session and then prevent them from meeting. He doesn't even have to. He has to give them a report within, I think, 11 or 12 months. Mm-hmm. So he could have unfettered power, and just keep them from ever meeting again.
He could. I mean, they're not playing by the rules. They're not playing by the rules. It's going to be whatever, whichever member of the government that has the support of the military behind them decides they're going to do. And this is not the United States that was created back in 1776. It's very, very much transitioning into this fascist dictatorship. And we all know that's what's going on. Our best hope to avoid this is going to be a crash of the economic system. And the president can stand up there and say, national emergency, turn in all your gold. The question is whether he can really enforce it, even with all those Canadian troops.
Well, another thing, though, Michael, that's in there is that literally it provides for him able to declare slave labor.
Yes.
Uncompensated, gather people up to enforce labor and a forced draft.
Yes.
That's in there as well. I mean, it's the most draconian thing I've ever seen.
It's anti-American. It's un-American, is what it is.
Completely.
It is.
Not even Soviet Russia would do that. But it's unbelievable, Mike. But anyways, that's what I wanted to call and talk about. So.
Yeah, it is amazing. Most Americans really have not done the research on these executive orders. They're sort of loosely, collectively called the FEMA executive orders because they're all tied in with the Federal Emergency Management Agency. And by the way, most Americans have been sold on the idea that the Federal Emergency Management Agency is there to take care of the country in case of an emergency. No, it isn't. Its real tasking is continuity of the government, protecting the government against calamity, including the American people. That's why their performance in these natural disasters has been so poor. It's not what they're really set up to do. They're there to protect the government from the American people. So is the Department of Homeland Security.
Can I make one more point here, Mike?
Sure.
My wife is black, and she will not hear anything negative about Obama. Mm-hmm. And when I point out to her, case after case after case of his evisceration of the Constitution and drones and surveillance and torturing and wars and the whole litany of all the things that Obama has done. She will hear nothing, but once she does, every once in a while she'll come back and she'll say, well, the president doesn't really have any power, it's the people who are above him. And there is a case to be made for that, but the case I want to that I bring back to her is that whatever these guys have, whatever the bankers and all that have, Obama can have them murdered at any time. Mm-hmm. He can make them disappear. And what is the real power here? When this is
the real power is the money. The real power is the money. Money rules everything. And your wife is one of those individuals I was talking about before that is hopelessly enslaved by the beliefs that she's been indoctrinated with. And this is why, in the long view, I seek a world completely free of belief. Because when somebody says, I believe, what they're saying is, I'm going to act as if X is true, even though X may be completely false. That's what a belief is, to get you to act as if something is true when it is not. We believe Saddam has weapons of mass destruction. We believe there were torpedoes in the Gulf of Tonkin. We believe in the lone assassins. We believe bankers are honorable people. We believe politicians tell the truth. Those are the chains of our enslavement, are those beliefs. No chains of iron or steel ever held a human being tighter than the chains made of those beliefs that we're indoctrinated with. You've got to abandon belief as the necessary first step toward true freedom.
Amen, brother.
Okay?
Thanks, Michael.
You got it. We're going to switch over to Tony in Indiana. Aloha, Tony. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hi. Thanks, Mike, for taking my call again. First of all, before I ask my question, I'd like to thank you about your vigilance on reporting the economy and how it relates to the founding fathers we live in today. So my question is, could you elaborate on what I believe, unfortunately and tragically, that today we are living in a Hamiltonian America rather than a Jeffersonian? Could you elaborate on that, please? I'll hang up and listen.
Okay, that's a very interesting way to put it, and you're absolutely correct, because Alexander Hamilton was the banker's agent in the early United States. Hamilton was the one who was out there saying, no, we've got to borrow from the bankers of Europe, and we've got to build up debt and credit in order to function in the world economy, and most of the founding fathers just thought he was really full of it, and that was part of the reason that led to the duel with Aaron Burr. And the Hamiltonian model is, of course, the private central banking model. A private bank has the authority to issue the currency as a loan at interest, and the founding fathers of the United States absolutely rejected that model because they remembered the predations of the Bank of England as being the prime cause of the American Revolution. And they understood full well if they adopted that same system, there'd be a second revolution against themselves. And so they went with the model that the government creates the currency, spends it into circulation, it flows through society, fueling commerce without accruing interest to a private bank. They tax it back at the end of the cycle to balance the books, and it worked very well for the nation and the people. The model is money as a public utility rather than a private money-making venture. Hamilton, of course, he was good buddy with all the private bankers, and he worked very hard to try and bring private central banking into the United States of America. And Jefferson opposed him, Aaron Burr opposed him, but of course he's still lauded as a great founding father, and he's got his face on the currency because he was very much the representative of the European banking cartels in the early U.S. government. So that little bit of history. But again, as I said, the advantage of all this globalism that we're dealing with right now is for the first time in the history of the private central banks, they may all come crashing down together at the same time. And when we talk about the blueprint for the new America, we have to put in there a little post-it note that anybody standing up and saying we need to bring back the Federal Reserve or the Bank of the United States and have private bankers in charge of our economy should be tarred, feathered, and run out of town on a rail. Redwood. They leave really nasty splinters. We'll be back after these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And I'm getting a story now that Senator Imhoff, Oklahoma Senator Jim Imhoff, is out there saying the U.S. must strike North Korea now before they shower the United States of America with nuclear weapons. They're really going to do it. They're really going to do it. The money junkies are desperate for a war so they can duck the blame for all the destruction their little Ponzi scheme private central banks have caused. And they don't care who it's with. North Korea, Iran, Australia, Santa Monica, Poughkeepsie, they don't care. They just want to get the blood and the bombs flowing freely so they can point to there and say, look, the war over there is the reason you're all suffering and starving. Meanwhile, there's an interesting little story. We mentioned it briefly yesterday. Over in Chechnya, in Grozny, their tallest skyscraper caught fire. It burned from the ground floor all the way up to the very top, completely, wholly engulfed, did not collapse. And of course, this is of concern to everybody studying the 9/11 false flag and World Trade Center 7, which had a few fires in a few rooms and collapsed into its own footprint. And before 9/11 and since, no steel-framed building has ever collapsed from fire. And this is just the latest in a long line of examples. This building was completely gutted, and it's still standing. The official story of 9/11 had no explanation for that was politically acceptable. The official government report on 9/11 didn't even mention Building 7. So there we are. The planet Earth seems to be getting unhappy. Apparently Mount Etna has erupted and buried a small tourist town under black ash. Another volcano has erupted over in North Sulawesi, Indonesia. And apparently people around Mount Guntur are being put on alert. They may need to evacuate. So planet Earth is rocking and rolling out there. Now, I have an interesting little story. This came out of the Independent in Great Britain, that over in the Netherlands, a ban on an organization that is pro-pedophilia has been lifted. This is an organization like NAMBLA that is openly lobbying for the social and legal acceptability of sex between adults and children. And the government of the Netherlands lifted the ban because the group isn't actually breaking any laws. And the only reason I posted this is because as reprehensible as you may feel their activities are, you have to at least acknowledge they're far more honest about what they're doing than the clergy. So, kind of puts that whole church child sexual molestation thing in perspective. We're going to be back after station identification. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And I'm looking at some of the headlines that are coming in here. At this point, the American corporate media are flinging the bovine excrement at us using a snowblower. And it's just amazing. Seeing this article, Aryan gangs growing threat. Note the word Aryan with its connotations of Nazis and everything. White supremacist gangs becoming an increased threat in and outside of prisons. And they're saying, oh, these white supremacists, they're finishing their jail sentences. We should keep them in there longer. Not like Jeff Skilling, he's a good boy, we should let him go. This is the new manufactured booga booga you are all supposed to be afraid of. Don't pay attention to Wall Street. Don't pay attention to Washington, D.C. Don't question the corporate media. The white supremacists are coming to get you. And they're hoping America will hunker down and stop paying attention to what's going on politically and economically and say, save us from the white supremacists. Please, Mr. FBI, save me from the white supremacists. So that's the new internal enemy we're all supposed to be afraid of now. It's just getting really, really weird out there. Apparently, Libertarian Stephen Landsberg has stepped in it big time. He's come out with this statement to the effect that if a woman is completely unconscious when she's being raped, and there's no physical harm, she's not bruised or bleeding, she's not pregnant, she didn't get a disease, then what's the big deal? There's no harm. And it was in reference to this woman who was sexually assaulted at a party, and she was so drunk she didn't even realize it until she read about it in the social media a few days later. And this Stephen Landsberg is out there saying, well, if she didn't know it was happening and nothing bad happened to her, why is she kicking up a fuss? And I think we're all intelligent enough to understand just why that's a problem. Because if Landsberg seems to feel that unconsciousness is a get-out-of-rape-jail-free card, we're going to see more of the socially irresponsible gentlemen, meaning bankers and politicians, using more of these drugs in the drinks of girls. Oh, she's passed out. License. Amazing here. Now, there's a bizarre story coming out of Canada. Up in Montreal, there's a 20-year-old woman who was arrested by the police. And what she did is she was walking around the city, and she saw a piece of graffiti on the wall that depicted a high-ranking Montreal police officer. She did not create the graffiti. She merely took a picture of it and posted it to her social network. And because of that, she has been arrested. She didn't create the graffiti. She just took a picture and posted it, and they've arrested her. So Canada's definitely getting a little bit extreme up there. Interesting little story. It is snowing in London. and the southeast, this in April. For all those carbonazis who are out there saying, oh no, pay no attention to that snow. April. It's snowing in London in April. Last time that happened, it was the beginning of the Little Ice Age. And the carbonazis are still out there trying to claim that global warming is the reason we're getting all this cold weather. It wasn't what they were saying 10 years ago when they were saying snow will be a thing of the past, the world is getting warmer, it's going to be horrible, it's going to be terrible. And now, of course, because the real world has not lined up with their computer-simulated hallucinations, they're trying to save face. We'll talk about this a little more when we come back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And we're talking about the global warming and the carbonazis. And we're parts of the Northern Hemisphere are still in the grip of winter, and this is April. And what's going on here is very simple. Back in 2000, when this whole global warming hysteria was ramping up, the carbonazis were screaming that snow would be a thing of the past. Al Gore repeated that same claim in 2009. The former head of Greenpeace proclaimed Greenland would lose all of its ice in 20 years. We're now halfway through that time period. Greenland has all of its ice. In fact, it's got a little bit more. We were propagandized with images of polar bears stranded on ice floes, even though polar bears can swim, and forecasts of an ice-free Arctic. In fact, last night my wife and I decided to watch this IMAX movie on the Arctic that's been redistributed in high-def cable, and it turned out to be a 40-minute commercial for the global warming. You know, this is the Arctic, it's in danger, it's warming, the ice is going away, the polars, and I got about halfway through it and I had to turn it off. It wasn't entertainment, it wasn't a documentary, it was very expensively produced propaganda to sell you this idea the world is warming, it's your fault, and you will atone by paying carbon taxes, and you will atone by obedience to a global environmental authority. So now we have had several record-setting winters in a row, and even the carbonazis are admitting the world has not been getting warmer, and every scientist who took funding to create a case for carbon taxes is now realizing their reputations and possibly tenure are on the line, because none of the dire warnings from a decade ago have come to pass. But, like members of Congress and members of Wall Street, these are not people willing to take responsibility for failure. They're not going to man up and say, oh, I guess we were wrong, which is normally, in the scientific method, something you're supposed to do. Well, that theory didn't work. Turns out the Earth isn't the center of the universe, and it does move around the sun. That's real science. So rather than manning up and admitting they were wrong or sold out in most cases, we're seeing all of a sudden this flood of new studies that somehow claim global warming is the cause of the record ice and snow. And they're claiming that the growing ice sheets are because of global warming melting the ice and producing fresh water, which is easier to refreeze in the winter. As if the fresh water coming off the ice just sits there and doesn't get mixed back into the salt water by wave action for months on end. And of course the other talking point they're coming out with now is that the world is actually getting warmer, but that heat is hiding somewhere. The world is getting warmer, trust us. You don't see it because the heat is hiding. The deep heatness is hiding somewhere, lurking, ready to spring out and roast the world. And usually the claim is that the heat is hiding in the deep ocean. Warm water rises. It doesn't just stay there in the bottom of the ocean. Warm water rises. That's why the oceans are warm at the surface and very, very cold in the depths. Deep ocean water is very cold. Here in Hawaii, it's actually used as a cooling resource. They'll pump it up from the deep ocean. They'll wrap a jacket of it around air conditioning heat exchangers to absorb the heat, and then pump the water right back out to the ocean. It makes your building air conditioning far more efficient than trying to do it through the surrounding air, which can very often be much hotter than the building. And that's why air conditioning can be very wasteful. And so using the deep ocean cold water as a heat sink increases the efficiency of building air conditioning, and lowers the costs. But they're out there still trying to raise on this busted flush. And the reality is global warming was never science. It's politics. It is a hoax to guilt the people of planet Earth out of their carbon tax money by claiming Earth is in dire danger and it's all the fault of human beings. Even though the dominant forces controlling climate on Earth are solar activity and the slowly changing shape of Earth's orbit. And they're still trying to push this thing because they're desperate for money and control. Now, I want to talk about this story. You're seeing it all over the corporate media today about this sheriff who got shot in West Virginia. And they've got the suspect. And there's a very interesting revelation that appeared at WCHS-TV and has not been repeated anywhere else. And that is a relative of the suspect went out and said this guy was on medication the doctor ordered for him. He wasn't doing illegal drugs. He was on some medication the doctor ordered. And nobody's following up on that. He was on some medication the doctor ordered. But, of course, the agenda is now gun-grabbing and fear-mongering. And I saw over on CNN earlier saying law enforcement is now under siege from Americans with guns. And the other one we're getting, as I mentioned earlier, this thing about the white supremacists are the new domestic enemy we're all supposed to be afraid of. And when I said earlier, when we started seeing these district attorneys being shot, I said this might be the beginning of a propaganda campaign to bias law enforcement and the court system against the gun owners. And this story from CNN about how law enforcement is under siege from gun-owning Americans seems very much in line with that propaganda agenda. Meanwhile, up in Springfield, Illinois, there's been a situation where a police officer tasered a pregnant woman. She was unarmed, not presenting a threat, and the cop just said, well, the heck with it. Boom. Now, it's bad enough you're tasering adult human beings, but what do you think that jolt of electricity is doing to a developing fetus? Now, over in Daily Mail in Great Britain, they were running this story about a lady named Francesca Minerva. She is a philosopher and medical ethicist. She's linked to Oxford University, and she's gone public saying that doctors should have the right to kill unwanted or disabled babies at birth because they're not real persons. That's the new idea. Whether, regardless of how you feel about abortion before birth, what she's talking about is abortion just after birth if it's not a perfect child or if it's not wanted. They're not a real person. They're Untermenschen. This smacks right of Nazi Germany's race hygiene, that they only wanted perfect babies and the rest were to be disposed of. And, of course, Hitler got all those ideas from the eugenics movement in the United States in the 1930s. But to take Francesca's argument to a reductio ad absurdum extreme, we could apply that same justification to sociopaths, kill them at birth, politicians, but I repeat myself, bankers, and anybody we're seeing on reality television. Now, we have been following this massive oil spill over in Arkansas. Yesterday we were talking about the fact that under a legal technicality, what is spilling out of that ruptured pipeline isn't considered crude oil. It's classed as liquid bitumen, and as a result, Exxon is off the hook for having to pay into an oil cleanup fund to deal with this mess. And taking it one step further, apparently Exxon has managed to declare a no-fly zone over this Arkansas spill. The Federal Aviation Administration has declared a no-fly zone in Mayflower, Arkansas, to be in place until further notice, and ExxonMobil is overseeing it. They're in control of the no-fly zone. In other words, Exxon has said nobody can fly overhead, meaning no media or even independent observers who have a camera and want to take pictures. If you ever wondered whether corporations are in control of this country, if we are not in fact a fascist nation, this is it. Exxon spills all this oil, and the government says, we'll make sure that nobody flies overhead to show the damage. The rules of engagement of the no-fly zone: no aircraft can fly within 1,000 feet of the ground in a 5-mile radius surrounding the spill. This is designed so that people can't take close-up pictures of the damage that's been caused. We've had a few pictures sent to us by people living in this area. They go out back with their camera and they take a picture. There is no justification for a no-fly zone other than to keep the media out, because there's a huge furor over the Keystone Pipeline and this latest pipeline rupture. Of course, oh, that's bad for business. We can't let the American people see that. No-fly zone. Get them all worried about North Korea. Pay no attention to the pollution. Meanwhile, there's an interesting story coming out of CBC. Apparently, a scientist up in Alberta has confirmed that deformities in fish are in fact linked to oil pollution in the United States and Alberta, Canada. And that's why they don't want you looking at that oil spill down in Arkansas. Going to take a break. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're going to grab some phone calls. Glenn in Portland. Aloha, Glenn. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, sir. There's a book that I read a substantial portion of several years ago. It's called The Nazi Doctors. And in my opinion, it is good, reliable scholarship. And anyone interested in how the National Socialist Administration of Germany used its medical people might want to take a look at it, unless they're really past master experts already.
Oh.
The Nazi Doctors. I don't know who wrote it.
Well, what's the basic premise of the book?
Any profession can be perverted provided you direct enough terror at them.
Well, that's certainly true for every country and not just Nazi Germany.
Of course.
Biological weapons research here in this country. Again, looking back at the ClimateGate scandal, the entire environmental establishment was co-opted by this. And it didn't take terror, it just took money.
Please take the ball and run with it. This is Glenn.
All right. Thanks an awful lot. And we're going to switch over to Dave in Florida. Aloha, Dave. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
To talk to, but I listen to you, brother, every day.
Well, what's on your mind today?
I heard I went on Drudge today, which besides your sites, probably two of my main sites I go on. And I went on there, and there's a thing about New Orleans, the parish prison there.
Mm-hmm.
They got prisoners inside the prison with loaded 9mm. Okay, they're shooting up with heroin. They're getting high. It's on the Raw story. If you go to Drudge, you can see it.
Yes.
It'd be a great story for you to maybe post up on your site. But I called the sheriff's department there in New Orleans, and I got a hold of a deputy, and I'm like, man, what gives? What is with this? They got like, yeah, we saw it. And I called the governor's office, and I'm like, is there any way that somebody can fire that sheriff? Mike, they're wanting us to give our guns up to trust cops that can't even take and keep loaded guns out of a prison and heroin and all these pills and everything. It's about a 20-minute video that literally is showing them all behind bars with the loaded gun. You got to look at it, and I was shaking my head, and I was like, oh, we're cooked. We're finished. If we can't even stop stuff like that, we're finished.
Well, I know that within the prison system, the ease with which the prisoners can get drugs and other things has been a scandal for quite some time. And it's one of the reasons for the high recidivism rate, where the prisons are just about locking people up and using them for slave labor and have stopped being about any kind of attempt at rehabilitation. The idea that these prisoners are able to actually have firearms inside there, that's a new one. But again,
check the Drudge story. It's crazy.
I think one of our readers posted this as a member story at my website as well, and I was going to look at the video after the radio show was over.
Wow, you'll shake your head. You please, everybody out there listening, call the governor's office. Get some of these people fired.
It is amazing. It seems like the people in prison have more freedoms than we do. They're getting all these drugs and weapons that we're being told we can't have. The illegal immigrants are, getting better treatment from the Internal Revenue Service and social services than we are. It does seem like there's already a war against the law-abiding American people. And I already got an email from somebody saying, oh, you anti-immigrant tribe. No, I'm not anti-immigration, but there is a legal process to follow. And if an immigrant wants to follow that legal process, by golly, yeah, welcome. My concern is, by definition, illegal immigrants are already criminals that are in this country. And every nation has a right to maintain their borders and control who comes and goes. If we want to be fair, let's have the same immigration policy we have, in this country that they have down in Mexico. Because you cannot cross from Texas into Mexico and get a job in all the social services. They will lock you up the moment they catch you down there.
Well, Mike, we got to do something, brother, because I'm just telling you, I'd go back to Germany. I'd go back tomorrow. But I talked to my sister-in-law who's in Germany. My wife's German. And they said that Germany's not even Germany anymore. France, I talked to another woman about France.
I'm hearing that from all over.
She said France isn't even France anymore. So I don't get it. I don't know what we're supposed to do. I don't know where we're supposed to go.
Well, that's always the problem with the world wars. There's no place to go. And what's going on in Germany and France and Canada and the United States is very, very simple. The bankers are trying to create a global fascist dictatorship. And that's why all these nations are being crushed down into this state at the same time, in order to prevent there from being a great place that you can go to. Personally, if I were going to be leaving the United States of America, I'd be looking seriously at New Zealand. They got a wonderful computer animation company down there.
Okay.
Okay?
Thank you, brother.
All right, you've got it here. Real quick, Werner in New Brunswick. We're almost at the end of the segment. What's on your mind?
Yeah, good afternoon, Mike. I just come in and I heard the previous caller.
Werner, hang on. I'm going to bring you back after the commercial break. Don't go away. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking with Werner in New Brunswick, and we're talking about the ringworm children. Werner, take it away.
Well, as I say, it just plain sets me off when I see and hear fellas always want to beat up on the German people. They have suffered enough through so many lies over the last 100 years, and I think anyway, the one who is without guilt, let him cast the first stone.
Mm-hmm.
But here in North America, there are so many who want to put themselves on a pedestal. They've been indoctrinated from young on with all the hate propaganda, and that they are such exceptional people. They better get off their soapbox.
Okay, well, let's pull back onto the topic of the ringworm children, because this was a huge scandal in Israel many years ago. And basically, to recap, the government of Israel obtained some X-ray machines from the U.S. government, and they even got funding from the U.S. government to basically take some Sephardic children and literally expose their brains to something like 35,000 times the recommended maximum dose, and the children started dying, and the parents were all told that they'd been X-rayed to get rid of ringworm, and quite obviously it was a program to reduce the Sephardic population, which were considered a threat politically and demographically to the Ashkenazis.
Yeah, to the Zionist part.
So it is a huge scandal. I'm looking at an article about it, which I'm going to post at whatreallyhappened.com. But you are absolutely right, and I did make a point of that talking to the earlier phone call, that this kind of co-opting of science is hardly unique to the Nazis. It is a global problem. We've seen it here in the United States of America with the global warming scam. We know that America, even as it screams about biological weapons in other countries, is engaged in research to create some very lethal ones. In fact, there's a story that's over on Russia Today about how a group of leading scientists, including a Nobel Prize winner, are demanding that the United States cease their experiments to weaponize the avian flu. And, the official excuse is, well, we've got to make it into a weapon so we can find out how to defeat against it. And, of course, that's the rationale the United States has been using to keep on creating offensive biological weapons. Well, it's really for defensive purposes. We have to know what the other bad guys can do. But in this case, all they got to do is drop a single beaker of this weaponized H5N1 that is human, transmissible, airborne, and you've got a major population reduction incident underway.
Basically, our biggest enemies are those mad scientists and those that finance them with whatever agenda they have.
Okay, the scientists are not mad. The scientists are simply doing whatever the funding is telling them to do. It's called the golden rule of science. Whoever's got the gold decides the science. Whether it's supporting the Big Bang, supporting global warming, and there have been huge embarrassments to science when they go down this route, but it does happen in every nation, in every culture.
Well, as I say kind of tongue-in-cheek, if the price is right, if the payment is right, they even shovel coals for the devil to keep the hellfires burning.
Yes, they absolutely will, and it's something that science as a whole ought to be ashamed about. Because like politicians and bankers and clergy, scientists are always trying to present themselves to the world as honorable and benevolent people who are only thinking about the betterment of the world and society. We know that's not true. We see it especially in the conduct of our orthodox medical establishment, who are putting out all these medications that are proving to be harmful, may not even do what they claim to do, and it's just all about making the money.
Hey, thanks, Mike.
All right. Thank you for the call. We're going to switch over to Barrett. Okay, we're going to switch over to Barrett in Washington. Aloha, Barrett. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind today? Barrett, are you there?
Are you guys? Yeah, I'm here.
Okay.
I'm from Oregon. Staying in Washington. The system is really wrenching down on us. Because we have 10 out of 10 of the Communist Manifesto, which is a central bank, no right to property, no right to family. And
yeah, but that's also the Fascist Manifesto. And our problem in this country isn't communism or socialism. That's just being waved at us by the corporate media in the hope that those of us old enough to remember the Cold War will hear Russians and communism and will just sign up for whatever the federal government is proposing. But the reality is we're descending into fascism. And amazingly enough, Vladimir Lenin many years ago predicted when American-style capitalism failed, and it was going to have to fail sooner or later, it would inevitably devolve into fascism, and he was absolutely right. That's where we are.
Okay, let me ask you this. Okay, we have to... I remember in the 70s, I was born in... Well, I grew up in the 60s and 70s.
Mm-hmm.
I was a teenager until 1980 something.
Mm-hmm.
So I was a little, but I remember Watergate. I was like 10,
mm-hmm.
and I started thinking like, well, and then I heard a story why they were taking these guns. That back in the 80s, 70s, the reporters. You know how when they show a cop shooting where a cop shoots somebody like 20 times on TV and you see the shock look like that. Everybody knows that wasn't necessary. You know what I mean?
Yes.
None of this is necessary. These wars are to make profits for General Electric, Lockheed Martin, the oil corporations. All the corporations have taken. That is fascism.
That's exactly right.
Well, is a corporate oligarchy. Oligarchy is a few men standing behind the president telling them what to do. Kennedy didn't do it. They killed him because he started to make the red $5 bills, which were real silver,
Yeah,
and
the United States
anybody's
note. And basically he invoked his authority as president to put those in circulation. It was a direct threat to the Federal Reserve, and 5 months later he was killed. And John J. McCloy, anyway.
Aaron Russo's freedom fascism is a good start for anybody, because this guy is a straight up, he's a producer and he's a professional, and he made, Eddie Murphy's Changing Places,
yes.
All these great films, and he actually discovered the corruption in that film.
Yes,
so
he did, and it's in our little page of videos. I'm going to need to let you go. We've got another caller I want to get on the line, but the problem here is fascism, and inherently private central banking is inevitably it is a fascist system of government, and that's exactly where we are right now. So thank you, Barrett. We're going to switch over to Tina Louise in Texas. Aloha, Tina. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Oh, I just wanted to make a brief comment. The caller that was talking about 9mm inside the prison.
Mm-hmm.
Honestly, there's one show host on another network, Tom Gamble, and he said a couple of months ago, he said that the shadow government was going to organize gangs to come against the people. And I thought, well, if they needed backup, I guess that could work.
Yeah, I could see where, you're already dealing with a group of individuals who are used to violence and have no concern for their fellow citizens. Yeah, absolutely. That would be an explanation for the prison systems to allow them to have drugs and fun and guns. And we're already hearing where prisoners are going to have to be let go because they're running out of space in the prisons. And they can defeat their little GPS bracelets. So, he may be onto something there.
I thought so. He seemed to have sources. But anyway, thank you for hearing me. Thanks.
All right, you got it. Okay. Now then, getting back to the science and health issues, Syngenta and Bayer have come under fire as being a contributor to honeybee colony collapse disorder. They have now come out with their official response to that, which is you should just plant more flowers to keep the bees alive. Our product is not having any harm. And I want to remind everybody, Bayer is the company that made huge amounts of money by selling a medication for hemophiliacs that was tainted with the AIDS virus. They didn't sell it in the U.S., it's illegal, but they went to countries where there were no legal protections, and they sold it out, and these hemophiliacs all came down with AIDS. Bayer made a huge amount of money. Nobody was ever arrested. And so we're seeing, again, this corporate idea of we're going to make mistakes, we're going to do what makes the most money, and if something goes bad, we'll just cover it up, like ExxonMobil having a no-fly zone over that oil spill in Arkansas. And that is the hallmark of fascism, when government and corporations are aligned together against the general population. That is fascism. Exxon's no-fly zone proves that's where we are on this thing. Now then, we've got another caller. Ed in Connecticut. Aloha, Ed. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, I want to run something by. I was watching O'Reilly last night, and Mike, I want to run something by you. I was watching O'Reilly last night, and they were talking about the New World Order and the people. They took a poll and had a percentage. And what is the difference between the New World Order and this elite banking system? And it seems like they were making fun of this whole thing between him and Dennis Miller, and it kind of you off. What is the truth here? What's going on?
Well, the corporate media is always going to make fun of anybody who's concerned about the direction the nation and the world are going in. And I noticed they were doing all these stories about how polls show Americans believe in conspiracy theories, and inevitably, along with 9/11 and private central banking, they would lump in chemtrails and HARP and all this other stuff to sort of kookify the whole discussion. And it's a propaganda technique called poisoning the well, which is when you have independent media and concerned citizens discussing a serious situation like the fraud of 9/11, you immediately try and throw some garbage in there that can be used to ridicule the whole question, like, oh, there was no plane at the Pentagon, or the rest of it. And it's a very, very old propaganda technique, and we've seen it time and time again. But as far as the New World Order is the form of government the private central bankers want. They want a global reserve currency, and they want a government to administer it, And this New World Order government is going to be just as enslaved to the private central bankers as the U.S. government is to the Federal Reserve and the governments of Europe are to the ECB. So there really isn't a lot of difference between them. It's an attempt to make it look like there's a civil government that's still keeping abuses under control, but obviously looking around this country we can see that that's simply another illusion.
Right. And the other thing is we get involved so much in our work to pay our taxes. We're like gerbils on the wheel. We have to run like heck to make money to satisfy this conglomerate that's running our system here. But yet all the people can't get together, but they're too busy paying taxes. And we only have a site like yours, which is a great site. You're perhaps maybe almost 6 to 5 months ahead of what's going on in the regular media.
Mm-hmm.
I've checked your site out and talked, went online and did some research on you, and you're a pretty up-straight guy.
Well, thank you. And the situation, getting back to what you were talking about, this conglomerate that's keeping us on the wheel, that is by design, to keep us so busy dealing with, all of the forms and paperwork and the rest of it, that we're not paying attention to what's going on. And again, this is nothing new. Go back to your William Shakespeare, Henry V, where Henry IV is advising Henry V, make it your business to keep giddy minds busy. Load them up with junk. Give them all kinds of forms they have to fill out. Keep them scrambling to be in compliance with all of this pointless regulation, so they're too busy to pay attention to what the ruling class is doing. But again, we understand that's the game they're playing, and more people are simply not bothering with the paperwork, and they are paying attention to what's going on. Because especially between the crash of this Ponzi scheme bank and the rush to try and mask that crash with a world war, this is going to affect every single living human on planet Earth, and people are waking up to that reality.
I hope everybody wakes up, but I tell you, this Obama is a perfectionist that's coming out with more rules than you can possibly keep up with, and that's the problem. We can't keep up with him. He puts too much out.
Well, that's the whole point, to keep us all so busy looking at Obamacare regulations and filling out all these little thousands and thousands of pieces of paper that we're supposed to write to get the government's permission to be alive. That's the whole point. Keep us all cluttered up, keep us all junked up. We're too busy filling out the forms to pay attention to what the government is doing. And again, nothing new about that. Even Shakespeare realized that was the game that was being played.
Right. It's just terrible that we didn't wake up much earlier.
Well, but we're awake now, and again, it looks like that whole financial system is going to come down, and everything that we can do to bring it down faster, it means there's less and less a chance they're going to get this world war going. But with Senator Jim Inhofe out there saying we just have to go ahead and attack North Korea, it's obvious that's the game plan. The Wall Street boys and Washington, D.C. are simply going to duck the responsibility for having wrecked what used to be the greatest nation on earth by ginning up a new world war for themselves to hide behind. Yes, life is tough, but there's a war on. And it worked the last few times. I don't think it's going to work this time. Okay?
Yeah.
All right.
No problem. Up to good work. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Thank you for the phone call. All right, we're coming up on the end of the show here. Let's see. Out in California, a couple of interesting laws here. There's a new California Right to Know Act that is under consideration by the legislature, would allow consumers to find out who has their personal data and to get a copy of it by request. It's called the Right to Know Act. I think it's a very good thing. We know that marketers and cable TV and all, they're always collecting data. Those supermarket shopping cards are collecting your buying habits to sell to marketers and advertisers and also to the United States government. And I think people should have a right to know what's being collected on them and to request that it be erased. Meanwhile, over in Great Britain, the European Union is passing a similar law that would allow Europeans to review data being held in private data banks and to have the right to have it erased. The right to be forgotten is what they're calling it. Great Britain is trying to say, no, we won't do that. We have to protect these marketing databases because there's so much money to be made there. Who cares about privacy for ordinary people? So it's two different takes on the same problem. We'll be back after these commercials. And Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And the corporate media is now talking about this new strain of bird flu that is proving very deadly. It has a mortality rate of about 30%. That is pretty serious slate wiper stuff. They're saying apparently part of the vector they suspect for this new strain involves some pigs that were floating in this river in China. So we're already talking about another splice job. Like back in 2009, flu, everybody buy vaccines, it's a pandemic, and it turned out not to be a pandemic, and not that many people have been infected with this one. It's just another ramp-up of the terror to get you running to your doctor and buying another vaccine here. And it's, again, it's a splice. Back in 2009, it was the same thing. They were calling it a splice between avian flu, human flu, and pig flu. And that's why we were calling it the when pigs fly flu. And we know the CDC was deliberately creating these things many, many years ago, just like they're playing around with taking bird flu and making it easily transmissible to humans. They're playing with all this. And who knows, maybe somebody dropped a test tube. They're playing with extraordinarily dangerous materials over there. We need to keep an eye on that. Jay Rockefeller is now out there saying the FCC has to regulate the Internet for the children. I always drag that one up. In other words, what Rockefeller wants is for people who have websites, blogs of any kind to obtain an FCC license the way radio and TV stations have to do now. And the idea being that this will allow the government to choose who is allowed access to the bandwidth and who is not. I have a strange feeling that WhatReallyHappened.com might not get that FCC license. But Rockefeller is putting this basically on the idea of preventing cyberbullying of children. Now, children can be very cruel. And bullying is hardly something that came into being along with the Internet. We all got bullied in our schoolyards when we were small children. It is a fact, unfortunately, of young life. But they're now saying cyberbullying is a reason for the government to take control of the Internet. And we understand the government needs to somehow find a way that the public will accept to start imposing content control on the Internet. Because they're losing the war for the minds of America on this one. I'm almost out of time. I want to get back to the situation with Korea. We are seeing this rapid attempt to escalate all of these wars into something everybody recognizes, oh, it's a new world war, to get us to forget all about the banker predations, Wall Street crimes and fraud, government corruption. We can't deal with that now. We're in a war for our survival against whoever we're going to be at war with. So I need all of you to be paying attention to what's going on. And as you go through your life and you're talking to your friends and your family and your coworkers, please share your concerns that this is just another fraudulent case for an invasion, just like Saddam's weapons of mass destruction, because the only way we can call this off is if the government starts to realize they will not be believed about North Korea's nuclear threat. There's the music. We got to head on out of here and get some errands done, and we'll be back here tomorrow, Friday, on the Republic Broadcasting Network. Until then, stay safe, stay well, stay informed, make good choices. Share what you know with who you know. Please support Republic Broadcasting. Please support WhatReallyHappened.com. We are not owned by any large corporations with hidden agendas. We need you to unite together, the little money, to unite together to defeat the big money. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.